Hello and welcome to Big Deal. While corporate India has embarked on the ESG journey, so far there has been a big push on the E or the environmental aspects of sustainability. Today we will talk about a new initiative on the social aspects called the Social Compact. More than 24 companies have signed up to be torchbearers for better working conditions for the workers. Not just their own companies, but even vendor partners, contractors, to create a healthier work environment and lifestyle for these invisible workers. Let me welcome the participants instrumental in this cause: Meher Pudumjee of Thermax, Anita George, who's an ex-World Bank, ex-CDPQ and now a sustainability investor, and Pirojsha Godrej of Godrej Properties. Welcome to all of you to CNBC-TV 18. Meher, let me begin with you. Articulate for us the purpose and goals of Social Compact.
Sure. Thanks a lot for inviting me, Nisha. So Social Compact actually started with the migrancy or the walking of several millions of people when the pandemic hit 2 years ago in March. And it was industry and NGO partners that came together. And we said, what can we do? Instead of pointing fingers at others, what can we do something about it? And so we joined hands and we decided to start something called the Social Compact, which basically sets standards for ourselves in terms of giving workers a much greater dignity and equity in life. And the whole idea being that a responsible business is, in the long run, a successful business. And that's how the whole thing started.
That's right, Meher. Sustainability of business practices as well as dignity of labor, those are the key matrices and important aspects to look at here. But another signatory to this particular compact is Godrej Properties as well, and Pirojsha is right here with us. Pirojsha, help us understand what the industry needs. You come from construction company which has contractors, vendor partners who take care of the workers, who are very, very important. During the COVID times, we saw the migrant worker situation. What is the clarion call for the industry? What needs to be done on the ground?
Risha, I think a lot of things need to be done. As Meher rightly pointed out, I think it was quite tragic to see the difficulties that faced construction workers during the pandemic. And I think it brought attention to the broader issues faced by construction workers. While I think it was a fairly acute situation during the pandemic, there are more widespread problems that even better times are making life quite difficult for unorganized workers. And I think the SoCo initiative is a great attempt at putting a system behind what we should expect all reasonable businesses to do. So some of the highlights of what is expected are, maximize safety for construction workers against life-threatening accidents and health risks. We've seen that, per construction hour, Indian labor is faced with significantly higher risk of fatal accidents than in many developed countries. And I think that's something we need to address. Another area of focus has been gender equality, both in pay as well as in opportunities. We've seen, for example, in Godrej Properties, we put a lot of emphasis in gender equality and in increasing the gender representation in our management teams, but not as much has progressed on the construction worker side, where only about 2% of our employees as construction workers are women today. Another pillar of SoCo's initiative is good health and adequate social security cover. We have schemes that the government has rolled out, but unfortunately, too few construction workers are benefiting from those today. Ensuring living wages, enabling access to entitlements, and ensuring that workers are being upskilled so they can participate in the future of the work economy and some of the other areas that SoCo had laid out. And I think these are all areas that each company can play a part in impacting. It's true that it's a complicated system with a lot of dependencies, but I think it's important that we take a lead, and ultimately, as a primary employer of these contractors, I think it's important that Godrej Properties set the standard for its workforce.
That's right, Pirojsha. In fact, big companies, listed companies like yourself, where the onus for ESG compliance is much higher, need to actually take the entire ecosystem together. And that is also one of the critical aspects of sustainability, that is creating the overall ecosystem with your business partners and your vendor partners as well. But Anita, you have, as part of World Bank, CDPQ, dealt with several investments, several portfolio companies. Is this particular change and this consciousness a big mindset change now?
Absolutely, Nisha, and I'm very pleased to be here, especially with Meher and Pirojsha, because they are actually leading this effort, and it's wonderful that industry is taking an initiative. As a financier, all through my career, whether with the World Bank Group or the CDPQ, I've seen the journey where the E has got integrated. And if you think back 20 years, the E is really where the S is today. So industry focused on E, understood that there is a need to mainstream environmental concerns into business practices. My hope is that we can do the same for the social aspects, especially the people who build the factories and the projects that we are financing often do get ignored and neglected, and that's something which I've seen again and again. If you can address in an integrated fashion, not just in terms of the main contractor, but also subcontractors, such that, as Pirojsha and Meher mentioned, the goals of providing dignity, identity, the ability to have health and safety at the workplace, the ability to have good sleeping and resting places, because a lot of the workers being migrant move to the construction site. These are aspects that as a financier one needs to get into much more and not just have a tick the box approach. Fortunately, I've seen that shift really starting to happen, and as you rightly said, Nisha, it's first and foremost a mindset shift to see that the workers right to the end of the chain are integrated in a way, and this can only help your business in an environment post-pandemic where we are seeing globally, not just in India, that it's become more and more difficult to attract talent, to attract skilled workers, to attract construction workers. It's very important that the focus actually goes on the S part of ESG.
So many important points there made by you, Anita, and of course a concerted effort is required, and that's what the industry is trying to do here. But one important aspect has been that since we are well populated country and there is poverty, the industry was negligent of these issues, probably because you will always find workers, and only during the COVID situation, the migrant worker situation, that we have seen a crisis situation where a lot of workers may not want to migrate now for these low paying jobs. Now, Meher, I want to understand one important aspect which is very critical to ESG compliance, which the industry is toiling with and evolving over time. We are all learning. E has been sorted because the parameters have been set, how you are going to be net zero in carbon emission, how much of renewable energy is being utilized. In terms of the social aspects and conditions, uplifting the conditions of the workers, what are those critical matrices by way of which you can judge companies on the impact of these measures being taken?
Sure. So as Pirojsha rightly said, there are 6 parameters or 6 outcomes that we've set for ourselves. One is on living wages rather than just minimum wages. The second is on social security as well as health. The third is on safety. Fourth is on gender equality. Fifth is on access to government entitlements. And seventh is upskilling our workers. And so on all
Meher,
these
I want to
parameters,
stop
we
you
have
there and understand one important thing. By definition, again, it can be very subjective. Let's pin down this particular topic. When you say living wages, how do you
yes.
define that? Are there parameters to define it?
I think the way we have set it for ourselves today is, first of all, what percentage of our informal workers are at a minimum wage? Because not even everybody today is at a minimum wage. So can we find out for ourselves how many are at a minimum wage and then how many are above that? So I think there are many parameters that we have set for ourselves, which is almost like a dream or a wish, but we have to start somewhere and then move it up.
Right. Pirosha, how many from your industry would be compliant given the cost economics involved in also uplifting the conditions of the workers?
Isha, I think you're right that I think compliance today would be quite poor, but there are many things that we can do, and I think there's absolutely no place for a sense of hopelessness about this. I think it is a big problem, but there are big opportunities to solve it. For example, something that actually nobody was paying attention to until the pandemic threw up some data on this is that already today the government charges all real estate developers a 1% cess of construction costs for what's called the building and other construction workers welfare. And we have across various states 40,000 crores collected in this scheme that is going unutilized. Our research suggests that only 35 or so percent of construction workers have received the benefits that were announced during the pandemic. So I think unlocking some of these is a step that actually doesn't cost very much. So for example, Godrej Properties has now insisted that 100% of its workers be educated about these government initiatives, be given the tools required to apply for these. And again, this is not something that the company has to bear. The government has already collected these funds from developers. So I think,
yes,
we need to be proactive in thinking about how to unlock some of the things that have already happened.
yes.
And as Meher said, we need to also look at business success from a slightly broader lens. And include, societal welfare as an important part of that. And I think the business case for businesses is quite strong because, whether you look at the way investors regard companies that are focused on ESG and the valuations that such companies can get, all of these are good reasons for companies to do it out of a sense of self-interest. But I think it's important that we also ask companies to focus on the broader interest.
Right. The government unlocking the funds is very, very critical because that's going to be the lifeline of some of these efforts, Pirosha. But you talked about the motivation and the push, and that's where the investor community also plays a very important role. We'll slip into a break on this particular discussion and come back and continue the conversation, and especially on what are the ecosystem stakeholders, responsibilities and how they can push this particular agenda. Stay tuned to Big Deal. Welcome back. You're watching Big Deal and we are discussing the social aspect of ESG. Now, before the break, Anita, we were discussing what are the motivations and the push factors coming in. Investors play a very critical role here. How are sustainability investors like yourself, pushing more and more companies to comply towards this?
Thank you, Nisha. I would say that, with the COP26 and the Sustainability Standards Board having been set up, the various parameters on the E, S, and G are coming together at a global level. So we have at least a metric and an approach and a methodology to start with. We as investors, and I can talk for the institutional investors, we have a group, for example, called the Leadership Network. And these institutional investors have taken the step to make sure that the S is also taken into account while evaluating companies for investments, as well as while managing the portfolio of investments. So I think just as with the E earlier on, the focus on S is increasing. As Pirocha mentioned, diversity, equity, and inclusion is a big part of this. And, being able to measure the number of diverse candidates in your workforce, the steps that you're taking to ensure that those employees get treated in the right way, etc. These are all aspects that investors are now focusing on. And I would just like to add that, when the discussion on the E began, cost was always brought up as a reason for not doing more. Now, the industry, as well as governments, as well as investors, have evolved to actually say that it's a benefit, as Pirocha said, an opportunity for business just as much as a cost. And actually, one should see it as an investment in one's people.
That's right, Anita. You've actually brought about the most important point here, the cost economics over there. And Pirosha, I'll ask you again on this particular aspect. You said it's tough. See, margin extraction is one of the prime reasons of any business and purposes of any business. Now the shift is going towards sustainable businesses. Are we ready to give up some bit of margins, and instead of calling it cost, can we put it into the bracket of investment in future?
Nisha, I think 2 points on this. One, of course, we should be willing to sacrifice some bit of margin to create a stronger stakeholder environment. But I would argue that you actually, it's a bit of a false choice, in that you probably don't need to sacrifice any margin. Because if you have a workforce that is feeling good about being on this site, is feeling that they are being taken care of, their productivity will increase, their attrition to other sites will decrease. These are all things with very tangible business costs. You mentioned that in the place of unlimited labor, but that's actually not at all true. I can tell you, on our sites, getting the required number of trained, skilled manpower for various construction activities is a constant challenge. So I think to be able to provide conditions that make workers choose to stay on your site, make them more productive, these are things with very, very tangible business outcomes.
Yes. And one more point I'll add there, Pirosha, is that if investors value your particular company much higher based on your ESG standards, then there you go, your equity value increases, and that gives a lot of push to the company. And premiumization of valuation is also a very big motivation for the company in terms of the corporate finance aspect. But Meher, I want to ask you, what is the adoption that you are seeing now? 16 signatories so far. And how is the reach getting more widespread? Because we need many more companies to join this movement to really create the full ecosystem.
Yeah, so it started in earnest about a year ago. So it's going to take time. As you rightly said earlier, it's a change in mindset, and any change in mindset takes a while. But we've seen that with companies who are small, they want to sort of get it right the first time. So they are willing to go ahead more with the social compact. We are also seeing that companies that are part of a larger global supply chain are also wanting to be part of a social compact, because they have a certain push from people overseas, from their customers overseas. And the third, I think what we're seeing is whenever we talk of social compact, or whenever we talk of ESG, the S is always taken as CSR. So companies say, but we're already doing it. And we have to try and explain to them that although the CSR does play some role in this, S is something that is very integral to your business. And so we need to see us looking at the S as the social element within our business, making the business sustainable in the long run.
That's right. You mentioned a very important point there, Meher, but I want to ask you this CSR being differentiated from the social aspect is very, very critical. How is that being understood, and what are the other key challenges that you are facing in really creating the ecosystem towards the employee welfare, the workers' welfare?
So, part of it can be seen as CSR, which is the entitlements, the government entitlements. And so, Social Compact has also started something called a Worker Facilitation Center. And what that means is that we open up an area in a particular, like say, for example, in Pune Municipal Corporation or Pune Pimpri Chinchwad Municipal Corporation in Pune. We're opening up facilitation centers where we are allowing and welcoming people from all other companies, whether they are informal workers, even formal workers if they want to see whether they can access government entitlements. Like, say, for example, the Aadhaar card, or if you can get health benefits, if you can be part of the ESIC scheme. So we're trying to bring people together through these worker entitlement centers. That could come through CSR. But the S part of it, where we talked about health and safety, where we talked about living wages, where we're talking about uplifting skills, all that has to be really part and parcel of our business. It has to be part and parcel of training people within the organization to see it differently, to again have a mindset change, to see how do we bring in people and how do we bring them to an equitable and inclusive part of life, basically.
That's right, Meher, very well articulated there. So dignity of labor is really essential at this particular point, and that's what we are looking at. Thank you so much, Anita, Meher, as well as Pirosha, for taking us through all the insights on this new cause on the social aspects of ESG. And this particular momentum has really begun right now on the sustainability path for the corporate India, and hopefully it will gain more momentum going forward as we move towards ESG compliance. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Big Deal. Thanks so much for tuning in.